Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and welcome to another episode of Data Nation. It's been a while since I've done an episode, and today what I want to talk about is multi-table versioning and why abstractions matter. But before I get into that, just to remind you that because there are new episodes of pretty much all the podcasts that I'm doing right now. So that would be Gnarly Data Waves. That's always a new episode every week. So if you haven't been subscribed to Gnarly Data Waves, make sure you do that. Select Star from Data Lake, and new in the grand schema of things, because puns. Okay, so you can find all of those on iTunes and Spotify, so do subscribe and share with your friends, because I talk in hopes that you learn something from and you enjoy it and share it. So I appreciate it when you do. And of course, always add me on LinkedIn or Twitter at AM Data Lakehouse, and always glad to interact. But now on to the topic of today. So bottom line is, what I want to talk about is like why abstractions matter. Now, what's an abstraction? An abstraction is something that just sort of simplifies something that's actually more complicated. Okay, so for example, when you work with a database, a table is an abstraction. Okay, you think of your data as a single table, but probably under the hood, there's a lot more going on in the database. Like the actual data is probably stored across maybe one or multiple files, depending on how much data that is. There's probably metadata on that data that's used to help more efficiently access that data, indexes, and so forth and so forth and so forth. But when you interact with the database, you just interact with your table. Okay, this is why Hive was such a big deal, because before Hive, you had to use pure MapReduce when you were working on Hadoop clusters, and you couldn't just think of your data as a table. You have to think of your data as what files comprise of your data set. And it was just a lot more thinking involved. Okay, and it doesn't mean there's less thinking involved, but the idea is, where do you allocate that thinking? Am I allocating that thinking on the implementing the tools to help me develop a solution, or in developing my solution? Okay, I'd rather dedicate more of my brain power into asking the question that I'm asking when I'm querying my data. Okay, so that way I can get the right answers instead of creating the setup for me to ask my question. Okay, so abstractions matter because, again, it's going to help reallocate how I think. So in the same sense that working with files was sort of not the ideal way to do it when we think about like Hadoop and MapReduce, tables were better because things like SQL and tables are just like abstractions that make it really easy to think about your data, or easier to think about your data. And that's why I like things like Nessie so much, okay? Because Nessie leverages those abstractions that especially people in the data space, whether you're a data engineer, data scientist, or data analyst, are used to using. Okay, so in Nessie, it's not file versioning. Okay, so you're not talking about your data set as a bunch of files that you're versioning. But the things that generally you're working with multiple tables, so it's multiple table versioning. Okay, so you're working with an abstraction layer that you're used to, tables. Okay, and another abstraction layer that most people are familiar with, catalogs. Okay, so basically organizing what tables are available. Okay, so these are fairly understandable, easy to think through abstractions. Okay, I have a table, one unit of one data set, and then all my data sets are kept track of in a catalog. Okay, and essentially by keeping track of the changes to my catalog, I am keeping track of changes to all my tables, aka multi-table versioning. Okay, and this is why it's such a powerful abstraction, because you can do multi-table things like multi-table branching, multi-table rollbacks, multi-table, so forth and so forth and so forth. And then because of the way it works, you can do those merges, you can do those branching, you can do every step of the way because of the way the abstraction is built in SQL, with a abstraction that makes it easy to actually take advantage of the conceptual abstraction of a table. Okay, so it makes Nessie fairly easy to use. Once you have Nessie in place, you just say, hey, create branch. Pretty easy. Okay, when you want to merge a branch, merge branch Y into X. Like, that's easy to think through. Okay, I can think through, I have tables A, B, and C. I want to make a change that I don't know if I want to keep. So I create a branch of my catalog and I make a change to table A, knowing that any change I make on the branch isn't going to affect what the results people get when they query any of the tables on the main branch. Okay, it's an easier thought process. Okay, there are other versioning solutions, single table versioning, which is great, but again, we generally work with multiple tables. There's file versioning, but again, it's much harder to think through, hey, the files in my data set than it is to think through a table. Okay, and again, doesn't mean that there isn't a place for those other levels of abstraction, but there's a reason I think really like multi-table versioning is really where the core of your versioning abstraction should be on the data lakehouse. And I mean, I think this is proven out when you're starting to see like companies like Dremel, who actually created Nessie and is a big contributor to the Nessie open source project, but also companies like Bauplan and others who are basically using Nessie at the core of their products that they're building for the data space. So just want to talk about that and kind of get that whole thought process of like abstractions matter, because they do. And think about why, because again, it's about how you allocate the thinking you do to accomplish a task. And abstractions in the data space allow us to allocate our thinking towards the end goal, which is the answer to asking the right questions to get the right answers, versus just setting up the ability to ask my question. Okay, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that. If you enjoyed this, send it to your friend, and just keep listening for future episodes. I'll see y'all later.